When students come to the studio, they should really be wearing clothing that's appropriate for what we're going to be doing. So that includes nothing that's really baggy or loose or hanging, because again, just like hair, it can get caught in the machinery. And also it can get caught in flame and it can ignite. Students also should be aware that anything hanging, so ironically, we don't really like to see a lot of jewelry in the jewelry studio on the body, because a necklace that's hanging can also get caught. It can lead to a lot of other problems if you do get caught and you get pulled into any sort of situation. Students should wear protective footwear because we drop a lot of heavy things. We're moving around hot material, metal gets really hot, and it's a place where they could really get hurt easily. I would say the most common mistake that we see in the jewelry studio, and we have to remind students again and again, is to wear proper eye protection. Sometimes students might have prescription glasses and they think it's enough, and it's not. Any of the larger equipment, anything with a motor, anything that's moving, you have to have your eyes protected. As well as when you're using any of the chemicals, the acids, the patinas, because things can splash up really easily. Not only do you need to be considering what the proper way to use a piece of equipment is, but also what the proper material is to use with it. So either if it's wood, metal, plastic, or the size of it, the scale. You know, one machine might be meant for a scale up to this big, and there's a machine somewhere else that might be up for a much bigger scale. When using the flex shaft at the bench, students really have to be aware that it rotates, it spins, it's really easy to catch anything, things can go in your eye. You should also think about protecting your fingers either with leather guards or with alligator tape. So one of the tools that people, I think, commonly misuse, and we actually use a lot, are the polishing machines. And the polishing machines, there's a lot to think about and remember, because not only does the exhaust have to be on and you need to be wearing a respirator at all times, you also need to be wearing eye protection even though there's a shield in place that's supposed to protect you. Also, you need to make sure that you're using it in the proper way and only on the lower quadrant of the wheel, because if you're not and it does get caught, it can go way up into the air instead of going back into the machine. So some really important things to consider when soldering would be that when you're working, to have everything set up in a really safe way, and there should be nothing combustible anywhere near the soldering table. If you really need your notes or something like that, set up a stool behind you and you can put it there and go back and forth, but nothing should be on the table. Also, again, make sure that you don't have any loose clothing and your hair's tied back, because it is a hazard. And also make sure that if you're using the mini torch or the casting torch, or even if you're enameling with the kilns, you need to wear eye protection that's going to shade your eyes, otherwise there could be damage to your retinas. When using the tanks and torches in the jewelry studio, one thing to remember is that if you're not certified by the fire department and an employee of the jewelry studio, if you don't work for the technician, you should never be trying to turn on any sort of the equipment. But what everyone has to know is, in case there is a problem, like if a torch doesn't turn on or some other thing happens, if it gets damaged, if it's dropped, if the hose gets cut, all of that can be dealt with just by simply turning the tank key off. And the tanks are only open a quarter of a turn, so you just have to know that if something happens, no matter what it is, all you have to do is just grab it and turn it clockwise 1/4 of a turn. Be aware where the extinguishers are. There's always one next to any soldering station, near the window in the main studio and near the benches as well. There's also one in the enameling room and in the senior studio. In the jewelry studio, all the areas that require ventilation have it. And when you're working at the torches, or you're going to be enameling or casting, you need to make sure it's on, because if it is on, it's going to take away all the fumes that are generated by the fluxes or the melting metals and get them outside so you don't have to breathe them. Because there's so many students working in the jewelry studio, a lot of times when you go to solder, someone has just been there. A lot of the things that are there, the soldering blocks, the tripods, the tweezers, could be really hot. So to make sure you don't accidentally get burned, always be sure to sense for heat, which means to hold your hand about 1 inch away from the object, and if you feel any warmth, you need to let it cool, it's too hot. We use acid in the shop. We use it to clean our metal and also to etch metal, but the acid we are using the most is what we call pickle. And pickle is a relatively weak acid, but it can still do a lot of damage. So whenever we use it, we need to make sure that our eyes are protected, so there's no splashing. If there is splashing, we don't get hurt. And also, when we take it out, we need to neutralize it, which means we have stations where there's water and baking soda, so the pieces can be dipped. If you do happen to get some on your hands, as long as you can really quickly dip it in the baking soda, it's not a big deal. Rinse it under the water. You also don't want to hang over the pickle pots, because you don't want to be breathing in the vapors that are coming off of them, because it is acid. In the case of an acid splash where you might actually get it on your body and specifically in your eyes, you can go to the eye wash stations, which we have some stations that are bottles, and also in the enameling room we have one that's actually on the faucet, which works really well. If there's a bigger spill, like a large amount that's on the floor, make sure that you notify someone immediately so they can do the appropriate actions. But also we have baking soda on hand, and the first reaction is to throw baking soda on it to neutralize it. This is a dynamic studio where there's a lot of people working, a lot of tools being used, and a lot of procedures happening. It's really important that everyone takes the proper safety precautions, because not only is it about your safety, but it's about the safety of the people around you.
The basic safety procedures for painting, the basic thing you want to watch out for is paint getting into your body. And the way you would do that is either by breathing in the dust, say if you were sanding a painting, or if you were to have paint on your hands and then eat, the paint would get on your food and it would get into your body that way. It's good to wear gloves, but a lot of artists don't like to wear gloves, so instead they'll put barrier cream on their hands. At least that's what I recommend, is not having dry skin, because it's really hard to clean dry skin. It gets into the crevices of your hand, and it's just harder to get paint off. Basically, you just want to have clean hands. You want to wash your hands when you're done painting. If you're going to sand a painting, you should wear a respirator, just a standard white respirator that you would get at a hardware store, just so that you're not breathing in the paint dust, the particles that are being sanded off. It's important to dispose of rags properly because they're flammable, and oftentimes they have solvents, so you're breathing them in. Solvents that you use for oil paint, if you breathe them in, they can potentially be harmful. Anything with solvent should be put away or thrown out when they're done, just so that it's not out and that we're not breathing it in. And it also is a potential fire hazard. If you have oily or rags with lots of solvent piled up, sometimes they can combust, and it can be a fire hazard. We use silicoil jars because we found that they're the most practical way to get rid of paint waste. The problem with oil paint waste is, since it's not water soluble, you can't just clean your brush off in water and pour it down the drain. It makes a terrible mess, and it clogs drains and so on. So you can't clean a brush initially with just water. They would wipe off the brush as well as they could on the rag before they wipe it off in the silicoil jar. The pigment comes to the bottom, so you always have clean solvent at the top that you can clean your brush off. And really, you only need to change it maybe once or twice a year if you're using it consistently, because it takes a long time for there to be so much sediment, so much paint sediment, that it gets up to where it's even with the coil, and you're not going to be able to clean your brush. And when that happens, I tell the students to shake up the solvent jar, maybe leave it upside down overnight so that all the sediment that's built up on the bottom sinks to the top, and shake it up and then pour it in the liquid waste containers. So now we have a brush that hardly has any paint on it. And then they can go and take a brush cleaner and they can go to the sink, wash off their brush. And that way there's still a tiny bit of pigment, but it's such a small amount that it's okay for that tiny amount to go down the sink. Each painting major gets a free silicoil jar for them to use. And I tell them that they need to label it with whatever's inside of it, whatever type of solvent that they're putting in it. They need to label that, and they need to also have their name on it so we know who it belongs to. And while they're using it, they can have it open like this one is, but as soon as they're done, they need to keep it lidded and labeled. With water-based paint, for cleaning off our brushes, we actually use water instead of solvent because it dissolves in water. We have something called a 3-jar system. And basically, I'm gonna wipe my brush off in these, and I have them labeled so I know that this is my dirtiest jar. I wipe off my brush really well on a rag, and then I first wash off my brush in the number 1 jar. And then I go on to number 2, and then number 3, and as you can see, that they get progressively cleaner, so that this is actually really clean water and is gonna assure me a really clean brush. And this has most of the paint in it. So that just allows you to always have a clean source of water so that you can always clean your brush off, and the last jar that it's cleaned off on is really a clean jar of water.
For clothing, you should always have cotton on, heavy cotton, and also you should have a pair of boots. No synthetic clothing whatsoever. Synthetic clothing, when it melts, it catches on fire, it sticks to your skin. The belt sander, disc sander, bandsaw, and the pedestal grinder, no gloves, because there's a pinch point. And you can't tell and you can't feel, and the glove gets caught in there, and the glove can pull you down, and then you're stuck in there. So no gloves there. When you're using the plasma cutter, you should always, 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 always have a respirator on. Also use the number 12. The spark on the plasma cutter is extremely bright. Have welding gloves on, a welding coat, cotton jeans, pants, and leather boots. And we also put up the screens here so people don't get peripheral flashes from the ultraviolet radiation. Also, if someone's grinding and you're making sparks, that if somebody's oxyacetylene welding nearby or someone else is nearby, you're also responsible for your sparks, your sort of rooster tail of sparks. You have to guide those sparks, and you learn how to just, okay, I'll grind this way. It's just shop etiquette. If you're going to oxyacetylene weld, you need welding goggles, a leather jacket. We supply the leather jacket. You need a pair of gloves, welding gloves. And then there's the gas, and you have to know how to turn the gas on. You have to know how to set the regulators for the gas, how to make a mixture, correct mixture of the two gases. And you have to make sure where all the valves are before you start with the system, because you don't know who was the last person to put it away. You have to have the torch tip on tight enough, that can't be leaking. All these checkpoints that have to be taken care of. If there was something wrong with the cord, a student would know in sort of setting up and or putting back. They would see a frayed end, they'd see insulation not covering, it'd be torn. Sometimes it's melted through. It's about repetition. You can tell somebody, and they can write all the notes, and they don't quite put it all together. It's through use and through repetition of use that it gets instilled, and then it becomes theirs, so to speak. This knowledge they have to own it. If you have a doubt in your mind about using any machine, just like, I think I can do it, no. If you have that thought or anything, just ask myself or ask one of my work study students that work here, one of the other technicians.
The Pratt printmaking workshop has pretty basic but very commonsensical dress code, so the main thing is just no open-toed shoes. In certain departments, it's not a good idea to work with a ton of exposed skin. Shorts are usually okay, but with certain processes, I would recommend that the pants would be more ideal. The screen printing washout booth has a breaker system. There's electricity and water, and wearing flip-flops is just definitely not ideal. When you pull the trigger, it automatically works. Just make sure that you're about 6 inches away from the screen so you don't split your screen, and that way you're gonna get the most effective amount of use from the power washer and not soak yourself. So we're in the lithography studio, and I'm going to demonstrate how to use the hydraulic lift. Very simple overview of the pedals to begin with. At the bottom of the lift is your brake and your release. So I'm gonna release it so I can move it. When I have it to where I need it to be, I engage the brake. So I'm just gonna raise the lift to where I need it to be. Very important that your fingers are clear from the bottom of the stone. So you're gonna work on the top of the stone and the middle of the stone, slide it out. In this case, I'm just gonna put it on top of the table. So I'm gonna raise it up. And while the brake's still engaged, I'm gonna slide the stone carefully onto the surface. Now I can move the lift again by disengaging the brake and floor it. When working with ferric chloride to bite your plate, there's a couple simple things you can do to protect yourself from the effects of the ferric chloride. The first thing to remember is wear eye protection. So goggles or safety glasses will prevent any splashes and eye contact. You want to make sure and wear gloves so that when you're placing the plate into the bath, your skin is protected. You'll want to be sure to wear an apron. Not only does the ferric chloride stain right away, and there's no reversing it, but it can actually put holes in clothing and eat through it. It is not as harmful as some other intaglio etching baths that are used, which is great. But you do have to keep in mind that if you get it on your skin, you have to wash it off right away. And in this process, we always wear gloves when we're working with the ferric chloride.
While taking a class or working in the ceramic studio, it's really important that you wear fitted clothing, especially when you're working with the slab roller or the wheels or any of the extruders, your hair not being tied back or wearing earphones that are loose or any type of obstruction that could get caught, like a scarf in these pieces of equipment. And also closed-toed shoes, no high heels, those are very important. When students use the manual kick wheels, they should be careful of not only their hair, earphones, other things that would be hanging down, but also not to stand up on them. They are in motion, and if you stood up, you could definitely trip and fall on them. The grinder is used to take off excessive glaze that is dripped down onto a piece or wear that someone has made. Precautions taken for that are safety goggles, there's an air ventilation system, and also a dust mask. In the ceramic studio, we have an air ventilation system specifically for sanding and scraping of bone-dry clay. This is prohibited throughout the ceramics department, except on the downdraft table. When turned on, the particulates of the silica and dust of the clay are pulled down by a current of air. The most common mistake that the students make in the ceramic studio is pushing the dust into the air. In the clay, there are particulates which stay in the air for 2 days, which contain silica, which are harmful for your lungs. When cleaning up spills in the ceramic studio or cleaning up dry dust, you always want to use wet or damp sponges, rags, mulch. The reason for this is the water soaks up the clay particles and they're not released into the atmosphere. In the studio, we use green mulch. It's a sweeping compound, which is wet mulch that keeps the particulates, the silica particulates on the floor, so you don't breathe them in. Also, for the spray booths, we use air ventilation for spraying any types of materials and also mixing clay and glazes. When mixing or using glazes in the studio, it's very important to wear safety gloves. These rubber gloves will protect you from chemicals which are in the glazes, such as barium and chrome, which could leach into your skin and be harmful.
Most people can handle being in the darkroom with the minimum of equipment. If some people are more allergic to photochemicals, they should wear gloves. A common mistake I see students making is moving the paper in the trays with their hands, not using the tongs. And it's important to either use the tongs or wear gloves, because if you go into the fix, there's a concentration of silver in there, and the body, it just builds up. It does not leave your body. If you do get fix on your hands, you should wash your hands immediately. That's the best course. Wash with soap and water and thoroughly dry them. There's common routes of entry of chemicals through the skin, breathing, inhaling it through the eyes. If a splash occurs to your eyes, we do have eye wash stations where the victim would turn their head upside down and pour the eye wash into their eyes continuously until they get them to running water, and then they would do it for 15 minutes or so. Here's the exposure unit, the UV exposure unit that is used in the non-silver room. I want to remind students not to look at the light because it could cause cataracts or blindness. Once you have your paper coated and your negative in place under the contact frame, lift the flap. Try not to look at the lights. Put the contact frame in as far as possible and then wait for the desired time. If you need to check it, lift the flap, take your frame out, look at your image. If it's done, then process accordingly. If it needs more time, put the contact frame back in and wait for the desired time, and then take out and develop accordingly. If students have any questions about chemistry making or the chemistry, they can always come to us in the tech office and we'll explain it or explain how to set the chemistry up and safety precautions they must take.
One of the most important rules of working in the shop is you have to be mentally present. So if you're under the influence of any kind of drugs, medications, alcohol, it's going to be very dangerous for working in the shop. So that's absolutely forbidden. Goggles are required for everything that's done in the shop because you never know when something may come flying into your face. You know, when you're drilling or cutting any kind of material, the chips are going to be flying. Both hair and fabric are really bad combined with blades. You know, they don't cut through hair. The blade will not cut through fabric. It will grab and it will pull your head or some part of your body into the blade and injure you really badly. So it's very important. We have a dust control system which will draw most of the dust that is created in cutting to help prevent, you know, ambient dust. And yet there still will be some dust that is not taken away, so that's why sometimes dust masks are a good idea to wear. Gloves are not allowed in the shop to be used when you're cutting, because even though they seem like they might, you know, be protective, they actually can get caught by a tool and pull you in again and injure you worse than if you didn't have the gloves on. You have to think about, you know, what is the best tool for the material that you want to cut. You know, the thickness of the material is one factor, the kind of material. So if you don't know, you should come and see one of the technicians and ask them. The rotating of the disc sander, you always want to be working with a downward rotation so that it doesn't, on the upward side, it would throw the piece out of your hand, take it out of your hand. It is very important that sanding very small pieces either have to be down against the table, or if they're really small, it shouldn't be used on the sander at all. You have to do it by hand. So very small pieces can actually pull the piece out of your hand and cause your knuckles or your fingers to touch that abrasive surface. To cut something on the bandsaw, first thing you have to do is decide which bandsaw would be the correct one to use. And the blade would be that determining factor. The blade guard should always be down close to the material, about a finger's thickness above your material. So one of the most dangerous cuts that students occasionally attempt is when they try to cut something that doesn't have a flat bottom. So any kind of, say, a disc or a ball is very unstable. So when you would touch the blade, a running blade with an item like this, it's going to tend to turn. It's going to rotate, and it could pull your fingers right into the blade. So the ball would be the most unstable item. It can turn in any direction. Very dangerous to attempt to cut, so it should not be attempted on the bandsaw at all. The other dangers of the bandsaw are attempting to make a cut, say something like this, a very tall item. People might want to cut a slot into a small piece. Fingers are very dangerously close to the blade. With the table saw, the most common accident is not necessarily being cut by the blade, but having the material kicked back towards you. The way the kickback occurs is when they try to make a cross cut with the fence, which means that if the piece is longer in this direction, then you should not be using the fence to make the cut. The fence is for cutting when the piece is long in this direction. It's difficult to keep it absolutely square with the fence. And when it turns a little bit, there's a tension created between the fence and the blade, and then it causes it where the blade actually grabs the material and frisbees it out toward the operator, and with a great force. I mean, it can actually send it completely across the shop. The correct tool to be using when making a crosscut would be the sliding table, or using one of the sliding trays, which most shops should have. So when the piece you want to cut is less than 7 inches or so wide, you need to use a push stick to push it past the blade. With the left hand, we go in the same position. Right hand approaches the blade. You'd finish the cut with a push stick.